Alright team, thank you for your time, thank you for listening. How's things? This is the LVD Sport Review of what we saw just a little over 24 hours ago. As I talk to you now, it's approaching 4 AM Monday morning here in the UK. And what we saw was an engrossing, riveting, rather than a rip-roaring 12-round contest to determine the undisputed light heavyweight champion. I thought all in all, it was something of a mixed bag of a pay-per-view, but then that seems to be what we seem to get as it regards to the Saudi investment in boxing. They haven't quite nailed it yet, and I don't think they're going to, judging by the way things are going at the moment. Nonetheless, we began with a interesting, shall we say, main card. I'll skip the first two bouts involving the Saudi Arabian fighter and Marko Milic. I think his name was Milic. And then we moved on to the opening contest of the pay-per-view proceedings, which was Ben Whitaker versus Liam Cameron. What is there to be said? We all saw it. We all felt it, I think. And when I say felt it, I think we all felt the pain that Liam Cameron is feeling after being absolutely jobbed out of a certain win. So much to talk about in regards to the scorecards of that fight. How on earth one judge had it 58-58 is beyond me. And I think another judge also had Whitaker winning, which is... How can they come to that determination? There was no way he was winning that fight whatsoever. I had it 4 rounds. Was it 4 rounds to 1 or 4 rounds to 2? I've got my scorecard here, right here. And I had it 59-56. I had it to Liam Cameron. And that's including that bizarre rule where, of course, the fight was clearly over in between the 5th and 6th round. The bell went to sound the start of the 6th round, which under the rules means that you have to score the round, which, looking at those scorecards without knowing for a fact, but there's only one way to score that, and it's to score the round even if the fight is waved over within 2 seconds of the round starting. So that 6th round would have gone down as 10-10 regardless. But for 58-58 though, on the card of the one judge, that would have to be 2 rounds each with 2 rounds even, which is absolutely bizarre. And as for the actual finish of the bout itself, I've watched it back I watched the whole card back again today, and I've watched that particular part back several times. And not that I'm a psychologist or a body language expert or anything along those lines, but to me it looks as if for all the world, on the one hand you've got to give Liam Cameron some of the blame, because it does look as if he's forcing Ben Whitaker over the ropes, or towards the ropes, in such a manner that Whitaker knows he's going over, which gives Whitaker the opportunity to... You can see it in his eyes, in my view, as he's grabbing hold of Cameron, he is going over that top rope, and he's doing it of his own accord, and he's taken Liam Cameron with him. But the thing which I noticed, which I haven't seen too much of online, is that of the 2 fighters who had the spill, of course Ben Whitaker had the injury, but it seemed to me as if Liam Cameron was the one who had the more major fall. He seemed to land on his head and neck and just rolled straight back over and rolled into the ring. As soon as they went over that top rope, I was thinking to myself, this fight is over. Even if they got back into the ring, Whitaker had his out. He found his out. He didn't look particularly crestfallen about the fact that he was injured, or that the fight was over and he was getting the chance to right that wrong. He didn't worry about any of that. What also pissed me off big time was that there's a long-standing tradition that, not that tradition means anything nowadays, but how many fighters in the history of boxing have been knocked spark out, clean out, and not that they've been forced to wait, but that fighter's had to get up to his feet, come to his senses, and then stand in the middle of the ring while his opponent has his hand raised. And that goes if you get knocked out, if you get stopped, or if you lose on points, whatever happens, even if you get disqualified. Only in very, very rare occasions, like in case of medical emergency, which this wasn't in my view, do you get instances where the fighter, who in this case he wasn't a losing fighter, but the losing fighter doesn't actually be there in the centre of the ring. I think it was it Rowan Murdoch, who was once stopped in 2 rounds by Billy Joe Saunders way back, who protested the stoppage, even though he had no right to, but he protested the stoppage by means of leaving the ring, and Jim Rosenthal for Box Nation was saying, no, that's not the done thing to do. But Ben Whitaker, of course, was probably thinking, I've lost this fight on points, I'm out here ASAP. And for him to, and also to be wheeled away in that wheelchair, how embarrassing. That's a meme for life, that is, especially when you combine that with all that showboating that he's done in the past. Where was that also last on Saturday night? That was nowhere to be found. Nowhere to be found. And he was in there with a semi-live body. Not that I'm going to be too negative towards Liam Cameron, because he fought the fight of his life. But, and of course, Liam Cameron at one time was a prospect himself many years ago. Didn't work out for him, as many of us will know. But to be absolutely robbed of that was disgusting. I think even if they did a rematch, there would be so many changes within the Whitaker camp. You're guaranteed that Whitaker, if it was to happen again, that Whitaker wouldn't be in that mental and physical condition that he was on Saturday night, because it seemed to me as if he was absolutely overlooking Liam Cameron until Liam actually clubbed him one in the face, and then that was all bets were off for him. But yes, it was not a good look, not a good showing, and the British Boxing Board of Control had an absolute stinker, and it seemed to me as if it was all to save the skin of a future star, who they hoped to be a future star. But anyway, onwards and upwards, because you can't get much lower than that for what was turned out to look to be a Bernard Hopkins impression. If you can remember that first fight with Chad Dawson, when Hopkins was trying to jump over Dawson's back and Dawson flicked him off, and Hopkins went down as if he was shot. And even then I seem to remember there was talk of surgery, which never happened, of course. That was Hopkins having an out. But anyway, that's in the past. We're going to stay with what we were talking about right now. Then it was moved on to Chris Eubank Jr. against Kamil Samareta. Not too much to say about that, as I said in my preview, if you're unfortunate enough to listen to that the other night. Thank you for those that did. That it was exactly what it was. It was a highly paid advertorial, if anything, for advertorial, whatever you want to call it, for Chris Eubank Jr. Ridiculous. It seems to me as if of course, he won that fight quite clearly, but he was getting, for my money, not that my money means anything, he was getting tagged way too much. He was getting hit way too clean for how much punishment he was giving back. For how he fights, he was doing his Roy Jones Jr. impression, the 2008 version of Roy Jones Jr. at that, I might add, and it wasn't particularly convincing. The Eubank Jr., which, if you can remember back to the Eubank Jr., who fought Dimitri Chudanov, I think it was Fedor Chudanov, one of the Chudanov brothers. That Eubank is long gone. He's nowhere to be found, and he's been replaced by the version we've got at the moment. He's got natural talent and athleticism, but that appears to be on the wane now, and I think we all know where he's going. It's going to be Conor Benn, and that'll probably be it for him in terms of meaningful fights. He's never going to fight for a world title or have a fight against, could you imagine Eubank versus Alan Canuli, Eubank versus Carlos Adames? They aren't happening. They aren't happening anytime soon. The other thing I wanted to add was that when I was watching the fight, I thought there's something, I can't quite put my finger on it, what is not right about Eubank Jr. and Andy Lee, who's always tremendous on commentary when he's not talking about a fighter who he's been personally involved with or currently training, and he nailed it absolutely spot on. It was Eubank Jr. was throwing long range punches from short distance, and that was what the problem is, and that is, I think, in the future how he will get found out. I doubt if it'll be against Conor Benn. As for the Conor Benn incident, not too much to say about that, apart from Conor Benn looked like a mess, and he looked as if he'd shrunk in half his size from what we'd seen him recently. He almost looked like a different person to the Conor Benn who was facing off with Chris Eubank Jr. in the week of their fight 2 years ago. Quite incredible to see. Excuse me. And the other thing I wanted to add was Conor Benn admitting quickly that he was under a ban. That was quite the cut to find. Quite the moment. Of course, it's now there's 2 years this month, of course, since we we're told that the Eubank and Ben fight was off, and by all intents and purposes, it looks as if, especially with Turki Al Sheikh having this meeting with Conor Benn, or Conor Benn being in that meeting with Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn, and Turki Al Sheikh, it seems as if he's definitely on side with the Saudis, and the Saudis are now going to work their bit to ensure that ban is as smooth as ever, or smoothed over, everything is as good as ever, and I'd imagine by next spring, everything will be good in the Conor Benn garden, and Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. will be getting that fight which Eddie Hearn is so desperate to force upon us, a fight which is so past its sell-by date, and the only people that fight matters to is to the promoters and the fighters themselves. Anyway, so good luck to them. So then it was, I believe we had Raven Chapman and Sky Nicholson. There we go. That's all I'm saying about that garbage, other than Sky Nicholson has managed to find herself a side job where a hyper-aggressive game of tag is all it takes to become a world champion, and earn what seems to be pretty good money. Nice work if you can get it. Jai Opetaia made easy work of Jack Massey, as was expected, really. I think that fight was on the card just to guarantee a finish, if anything else. I wouldn't be so bold as to call it a piss break fight, as I believe that was what the one before was for, but it wasn't. If anything, I think Jai Opetaia is losing some of that momentum that he had a year or so ago. I'm not sure whether that's because of some sort of outside of the ring issue. I think he was with Tasman Fighters before, was his promotional group, and there's all some sort of stuff going on behind the scenes there as to maybe that's why his momentum is stalled. But regardless, he got the job done and he moves on. And other than, I imagine if the winner of Gilberto Ramirez and Chris Bellum Smith take on Jai Opetaia, maybe, who knows. But then that meant we moved on to the co-main event of the evening, Fabio Wardley and Fraser Clark. What a difference compared to back in April, I think it was, the first fight. Unbelievable. You'd never even have thought that those two men had fought each other before, based on what we saw on Saturday evening. Absolutely surprise result, considering that Fabio Wardley come from an unlicensed background. That turn, which came shortly after the first right hand, which was effectively the fight ender. After that, Fraser didn't seem to know where he was on earth. Then Fabio pulled off that wonderful turn, which went just near the ropes, which absolutely took Fraser Clark's momentum away and led up to that damaging finishing shot. Horrible shot it was. I didn't see the dent in the side of Fraser's skull when it happened, but I did see the left side of his jaw, where it looked to me as if Fraser was suffering. I hate to say it, but it looked like to all the world, it looked to me as if Fraser was suffering from stroke-like symptoms when he was trying to gain his feet, when he was sagged near the ropes. Good job the referee called it off there and then. The only thing, it seems strange for me to say it out loud, but the only thing I would ask is is it at all possible, and this is rhetorical, I guess, is it at all possible for something to be up with those gloves? I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with Fabio Wardley's gloves in terms of they were manipulated, but the amount of injuries we've seen in British rings in the recent fun over the last 10 years, rather than you'd have thought going up, the safety element of things would have increased and these would be going down, but the amount of serious injuries we've had seems to be going up. And I wonder what the reasons for this is. And the only reason I'm mentioning this, and this is just an absolute stab in the dark, and it's because the brand that Fabio, I believe, and call me an idiot if I'm wrong, but I believe Fabio Wardley wears fly gloves, and I think fly gloves were advertised. Their whole advertising shtick is that fly gloves are the only gloves every single pair is handmade, and thinking about that in comparison to these other gloves just makes you wonder. I wonder if there's something different about those gloves or what. Anyway, wondering out loud. Well, that's maybe a podcast for another time, talking about those different manufacturers of gloves and things of that nature. But onwards and upwards again for Fabio Wardley. Let's say, unbelievable appearance. Frank Warren does his magic. Fabio seemed to come up with some sort of extra 10% or 50% even since signing for Frank, and now he's going to move on to some big opportunities. How much further he's going to go, I'm not too sure. I think his ceiling is almost there, but hey, who am I to say? And he's defying everybody. I wouldn't have even had him down to beat Simon Vallily. Simon Vallily was, of course, I think, Commonwealth gold medalist, and Fabio turned him over reasonably easily. So he keeps on doing it, keeps on beating the quality amateurs, making a bit of a mockery of the amateur system, especially when it comes to the big guys. And speaking of the big guys, we were moving on to the light heavyweights for the main event, Artur Beterbiev and Dimitri Bivol. What an occasion that was. Very tense atmosphere. I think the fight itself, after 4 rounds, I thought Dimitri had it in the bag. I had Bivol winning the first 4. He got his sums absolutely spot on. He wasn't giving anything away. He wasn't being too selfish. He was working mostly in singles. I think his basic punch power is far heavier than what he's given credit for, and I believe that was why Artur was not as aggressive as what he normally is. He was giving Dimitri a hell of a lot of respect. Artur looked pedestrian for large portions of that fight. I thought at times I wonder if the age has got to him. I wonder if he was feeling the effects of his surgeries. But it wasn't to be. It was just that Bivol has that wonderful, that Soviet style. There, I said it. I didn't want to say it, and I said it. But he has that style which is you have to give great respect for. Otherwise, you make it look like an absolute mug. At the halfway point, between 5 and 6, I gave both those rounds to Beterbiev. So at the halfway point, I had Dimitri Bivol 4 rounds to 2 up. 7 and 8, they were big. No, excuse me, I think I've got that wrong. I think after 6 I had it 5-1 Bivol, because 7 and 8 I gave to Beterbiev. I remember that clearly. After 8 I had Beterbiev 2 rounds behind. The 9th round I thought would be a pivotal round after Beterbiev had won the 7th and 8th. I think the 8th round also, importantly, that was the most important round of the fight. I then he glossed over that. Good job I didn't. The 8th round, that was the round where Bivol made his biggest mistake, I thought. That was the round where the first time, or I think the only time that Beterbiev was seriously hurt was in that 8th round by a combination. And that was the only time where Bivol got selfish. He moved in, went through too many attacking shots. And then in the midst of that, I think he had a long right hand, which was the first shot which really, really registered and severely hurt Bivol. That was the turning point of the fight, I think, for me. That enabled Beterbiev to steal that round, of a round that Bivol was winning by not doing very much. But that exchange swung it round for me. Then I thought that was the momentum shift. That was going to be the round which saw Beterbiev maybe come on with his late surge. But the 9th round, I thought Bivol won that. I thought, oh, holy moly. Bivol has managed to... What a job he's done there. He's won that 9th round. I had him 3 rounds ahead, which meant that, of course, that Beterbiev just needed the final 3 rounds to get the draw. And he ran the table. He did indeed. Rounds 10, 11 and 12 was when Bivol hit the wall, and we saw a bit of the old animal-style Beterbiev come out, and I swept those rounds 10, 11 and 12. So on my card I had it 114, 114, the same as one of the judges. The anger, of course, how on earth you get 116, 112 is a bit of a stretch. I thought if you had to put a gun to my head and say, who do you think won? I would have said Bivol, even though I had it 6 apiece. And also the point that the judge who had Beterbiev by 4 had Beterbiev up by 2 going into the 10th. It's crazy. How on earth do you have that? I thought it was a tale of 2 halves, if anything. First half was all Bivol, second half was all Beterbiev. Respect to Turki Al-Sheikh for calling it how he saw it. I thought, if anything, he was going to be on the side of his Muslim brother, but he wasn't. I saw a lot of that online, that a lot of people thought that the Saudis were inching towards Beterbiev because of his religious beliefs. Not to be the case at all. I also think that's not the type of fight that we want to see, and definitely not an immediate rematch. And I also think it was the type of fight we might not see a rematch at all. Nothing really happened to any controversy, and it wasn't, as I said at the start, it wasn't a rip-roaring contest, so it's going to be difficult to get that one, in terms of public interest, get that one on again. I think if that's the sort of fight which we've been calling out to, the rematch would, of course, have to take place in Russia. There's little chance of that, though. Excuse me. So it's quite interesting to see where we go now. Joshua Buatsi, does he want any of Artur Beterbiev? I wouldn't have thought so. There's little chance of an Anthony Yard rematch. Anthony Yard, of course, was in the Sky Studio. Less said about that, the better. He's fighting this weekend. I think we'll touch on about that a little bit later on. But that's about it for my thoughts on the card. What was my prediction rate? Right, Eubank, I got that. I got Fraser Clark and Fabio Wardley totally wrong. Ben Whitaker, Liam Cameron, I predicted a Whitaker win. I thought Whitaker was going to turn on the style. Didn't happen at all. As I said, I got Clark and Wardley bang wrong. I didn't make a prediction for Nicholson and Beterbiev and Bivol. I said Beterbiev by decision. Got that one right, quite proud, even though it shouldn't have been. Also during the previous 24 hours, Japan have crowned 3 more world champions. I think my calculations between super bantamweight and light flyweight, Japan have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, only 10 champions. And that's just between 5 weight divisions. Compared that to the UK, we've got Daniel Dubois, Chris Bellum-Smith. Is that about it? I think. Oh, and Nick Ball. That makes up our list of champions. And if you want to stretch that to the IBO, we also now have Chris Eubank Jr. by virtue of his victory on Saturday. And we've also got Liam Davis. So that's, what's that, 5? 5 in between all the divisions, all the divisions and the extra sanctioning body, as compared to Japan, who, as I said, have 10 between 5. So, and there's also a show going on at Top Rank and Hashi Promotions event going on in a few hours' time. As I said, it's just gone 4 o'clock here. It starts at 9 o'clock. Junto Nakatani's defending his world championship. Pound for pound entrant, in my opinion, Junto, so I'll be keeping an eye on that. Hope you enjoy it if you watch it. Thank you very much if you've made it this far. I'm rambling as normal. And if you want to keep up with what's going on LVD Sport, please hit the notification bell and please subscribe. Let me know your comments, what you think, what you thought of the fight, what you thought of the card. Always love to know what you're thinking if you're listening to this. And until next time, always keep your gloves up and your chin down. This is LVD Sport out for the count.